Have you ever felt like your brain's just, constantly buzzing, 1,000 tabs open maybe, or you just can't quite seem to land on one thing?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you know someone who struggles with that sort of persistent restlessness, or just finding focus in a world that really demands it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We often hear ADHD talked about in terms of, well, scattered thoughts, hyperactivity, or just a simple difficulty concentrating.
Right. The
You're not
usual labels.
exactly. And for so many people, this can feel like a really deep personal struggle, or maybe a confusing diagnosis to make sense of.
Hmm.
It often leaves people feeling kind of blamed or like they're somehow broken.
It's true. And those traditional views, they largely focus on just those surface behaviors, don't they? Or they offer these purely genetic explanations, which can feel a bit incomplete.
Definitely.
But Dr. Gabor Maté, through his really seminal work, Scattered Minds, he invites us to look much, much deeper than that.
Ah, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He offers a truly, I'd say, transformative perspective, really challenges those conventional ways of understanding it and opens up a much more, well, compassionate path.
And that's exactly what we want to do in this deep dive with you today. We're going to explore Mate's really quite radical reframing of ADHD,
Hmm.
moving beyond just the symptoms on the surface to uncover its often overlooked emotional roots, the environmental factors.
Yes, the context.
Exactly. Our aim is to reveal some hopefully empowering pathways to healing that are really rooted in compassion and genuine connection. We're going to unpack why Mate argues that ADHD isn't just some defect to be fixed,
Right.
but actually a profound story of adaptation, and ultimately maybe a call for a more human approach to understanding ourselves and each other too.
Okay, so let's get right into this core idea then, the one that really shifts the whole paradigm. Mate, right off the bat, challenges how we typically see ADHD.
He really does.
He doesn't just see it as like a genetic flaw or some kind of moral failing or even just problematic behavior that needs controlling. No, not at all. His perspective is fundamentally different, which, as you said, feels incredibly liberating for many.
It really does.
Yeah. If we put this in a broader context, Mate's core thesis is basically that ADHD should be understood as a neurodevelopmental pattern,
Okay, neurodevelopmental.
meaning, a particular way the brain develops and functions. But crucially, it's rooted in the interaction between some genetic sensitivity. He doesn't discount genetics entirely, right? But it's that sensitivity interacting with the early relational environment, especially under conditions of stress or what he calls misattunement.
Misattunement. Can unpack that a bit.
Yeah, essentially it's a consistent lack of that crucial emotional responsiveness, that deep understanding from caregivers. And this isn't just like an academic theory for Mate. No, he himself lives with ADHD traits and he's a parent to kids diagnosed with it. So he brings this really personal, authentic lens to it all.
Oh, okay. That adds weight.
Definitely. And what's so revolutionary is how he kind of liberates people from blame. He frames ADHD traits not as these moral failings or some fixed, unchangeable defect,
Right.
but as adaptive responses, strategies that, once helped a child survive, maybe emotionally survive, in their specific environment.
But now cause problems later on.
Exactly. Now, in adulthood or even later childhood, they limit functioning. And understanding that opens up entirely new and I think really hopeful possibilities for healing.
So he's really pushing back quite hard against some very common and often quite harsh ways people talk about ADHD, isn't he? Like the idea that it's just, laziness or lack of willpower.
Precisely. He critiques several of these traditional lenses pretty directly. First, there's the moral lens, the one that labels people as lazy or weak or undisciplined.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
Then there's the reductionist medical lens, which tends to see ADHD as just this fixed genetic brain disorder, mainly treatable with medication alone.
Right. The purely biological view.
And finally, the behavioral lens, which just focuses on the problematic behaviors themselves, seeing them as things to be controlled or managed or maybe even punished.
Without asking why they're there.
Exactly. Mattei is asking us to reframe our entire understanding, to move away from these limited views towards something much more holistic and ultimately more compassionate.
That's such a profound shift, moving from blame to really trying to understand the why. And Mattei has such a knack for analogies. Could you share his crooked tree one? I find it really captures how environment shapes us.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great one. He suggests, imagine a little child trying to grow, like a tree sapling.
Right.
If that tree grows in a perfectly calm, nurturing spot, plenty of sun, good soil, enough water, it grows up straight and strong, right?
Makes sense.
But if the weather is consistently stormy, if the soil's poor, or if it's constantly battered by strong winds, well, the tree bends, it twists, it grows in ways we might call crooked.
Right. It adapts to survive the conditions.
Precisely. ADHD, in this analogy, is like that tree. It's not inherently flawed or broken. It grew up in a stressful wind, so it developed in a way that adapted to those conditions.
It's not the tree's fault it leans.
Exactly. And it's certainly not broken. The key insight here, and the hopeful part, is that with the right support, more sunshine, better soil, maybe some protection from the wind, it absolutely can start to grow straighter, even if it always carries the history of those early challenges.
That analogy just perfectly nails Maté's message, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
ADHD isn't a defect in the person, but an adaptation by the person to their world. It completely shifts the focus from blaming the individual to looking at the conditions they grew in. That's
a huge reframe. Okay, now this is where it gets really, really interesting for me. If ADHD is an adaptation, what exactly is it adapting to? What's going on in those early, really formative years that kind of sculpts the brain this way?
right. That's the core question. And to put this in context, Maté really emphasizes that attention isn't just something we're, born with fully formed.
Oh, it's actually a developmental achievement. It's a skill the brain learns through practice. And primarily, that practice happens through secure attachment and emotional attunement with caregivers.
So connection is key from the start.
Absolutely foundational. Without that consistent, safe, responsive connection, the basic capacity for sustained attention, often it can't fully develop the way it's meant to.
So attunement, then, that word seems really critical here. Can you break down what that actually looks like day to day between a child and a caregiver?
Sure. Attunement is basically when a caregiver consistently notices, accurately reflects, and then compassionately responds to the child's inner state.
Noticing, reflecting, responding.
Yeah, their emotions, their needs, their distress, even their joy. When this happens reliably, the child gets this profound sense of being seen and heard and understood, and that creates a feeling of safety.
Which is huge for a little kid.
It's everything. This whole process teaches the developing brain that emotions are manageable, that distress can be soothed, and crucially, that the world is a relatively predictable place where their needs generally get met. And this capacity for regulating emotions is fundamentally linked to the ability to regulate attention.
That makes so much sense. The world must feel so overwhelming to a child. So if that consistent attunement is missing, even subtly, maybe a parent is stressed or distracted, what's the biological impact? How does that actually show up in the brain's development?
Yeah, and this is where Maté brings in the powerful idea of the biology of loss. He explains that emotional loss, and this doesn't have to be abuse, it can be subtle absence, like a parent just chronically distracted by their own stress, or maybe an environment that's just not very responsive.
Okay.
That, combined with persistent stress in early life, leaves actual biological fingerprints on the developing brain.
Well, like what?
Well, for instance, sustained high levels of stress hormones, like cortisol. They can significantly disrupt the delicate balance of dopamine and norepinephrine circuits.
Ah, the focus chemical.
Exactly. Those are critical neurotransmitters for focus, motivation, reward, emotional regulation, all the things often challenging in ADHD. This chronic stress also actively reshapes key brain areas. It can hinder the optimal development of the prefrontal cortex.
The planning center.
Right, wild for planning, impulse control, sustained attention. It can impair the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory and learning, and at the same time, it can strengthen the amygdala, the brain's sort of alarm system, making it more reactive.
So the brain gets wired for threat scanning.
In a way, yes. The net result is a brain biased towards survival scanning, hypervigilance, being easily overwhelmed, leading to that distractibility and impulsivity we associate with ADHD rather than calm, sustained focus.
Yeah.
As Maté puts it, ADHD is not caused by bad parenting, but stress from misattunement literally alters brain chemistry and development.
So many of the behaviors we end up labeling as ADHD symptoms are actually these intricate, maybe unconscious survival strategies that a child developed because of those early conditions.
Precisely. Maté argues many ADHD symptoms are deeply intertwined with emotional defenses built in childhood. Ways to cope with overwhelming pain or chronic stress or just consistently unmet emotional needs.
Like what kind of defenses?
Well, think about constant daydreaming. It could be an internal escape from an environment that feels overstimulating or maybe emotionally empty.
Right, tuning out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or inattention might serve as a kind of shield, a way to avoid painful realities or maybe overwhelming sensory input. Impulsivity in this view, could be seen as a rapid response pattern, a way of bypassing reflective thought to avoid vulnerability, or maybe just the perceived slowness of processing difficult feelings.
Wow.
Maté has this profound line: "What we call dysfunction was once the child's solution."
That hits hard.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
He gives this poignant case example of a young boy who was always spacing out in class. Teachers saw him as unmotivated, but Maté discovered the boy's father was very emotionally distant. The child's mind would wander as a protective mechanism, really, a way to escape those feelings of rejection or invisibility. And that pattern of tuning out later showed up as chronic distraction in adulthood.
That idea of attention being a relational achievement is so striking. It almost makes me picture a baby's brain like a radio, needing a parent to tune it in to get a clear signal.
That's a great way to visualize it.
So if that tuning is inconsistent, if there's emotional static or the signal keeps dropping out, how does Maté suggest that specifically leads to ADHD?
Well, following your analogy, if the parent or caregiver acts as that consistent tuner, gently helping the child regulate their internal state, the child learns to trust the signal, their own internal world. They learn focus, they learn self-soothing.
Okay.
But if that tuning in is sporadic, or if there's constant static, maybe from stress, unmet needs, chaos, the baby feels alone with all that internal noise.
Lost in the static.
Exactly. And over time, instead of building these clear, focused neurological pathways, the brain builds pathways adapted to that static. It becomes wired for constantly scanning, being hypervigilant, never fully resting or settling into deep engagement. ADHD, Maté suggests, is one way the brain adapts to living with this consistent static, always searching, rarely finding that peace and sustained focus.
So taking all this in, this whole holistic understanding, what does it really mean for how we approach ADHD? Not just in kids, but in ourselves as adults.
Yeah.
It feels like we need to rethink, well, almost everything, moving way beyond just looking at the surface behaviors.
It definitely raises important questions for all of us, doesn't it? And Maté insists quite strongly that if we stop at just observing the behaviors, we completely miss the point of ADHD.
We miss the why.
Totally. The behaviors are signals, he says, not the underlying condition itself. Most conventional approaches, they focus narrowly on symptoms, not sitting still, being forgetful, struggling with organization.
The checklist stuff.
Yeah, the checklist stuff. But Maté argues these are just the surface expressions of much deeper emotional and developmental dynamics. He reframes what we often call misbehavior or symptoms as actually a form of emotional communication.
Communication. How so?
Like, a child acting out might be signaling, "I'm overwhelmed," or "I feel unseen," or "I desperately need connection." An adult struggling might be grappling with managing internal states rooted in those early experiences. It's fundamentally about emotional dysregulation, he argues, not some moral failing or deliberate defiance.
That's such a compelling way to see it. Behaviors as signals. It reminds me of, like, troubleshooting a car. If a dashboard light comes on, you don't just yell at the light or put tape over it, right?
Right. Hopefully not.
You look under the hood to see what's actually causing the signal.
Yeah.
So how does Maté guide us to look under the hood when it comes to ADHD symptoms?
That's the perfect analogy. Imagine that car dashboard. A red light flashes. It's a signal, pointing to an underlying issue. It's not the problem itself. Punishing the light won't fix the engine.
Makes sense.
ADHD behaviors are like those dashboard lights. They signal underlying emotional stress or unmet needs, or maybe those developmental gaps we talked about. Maté guides us to metaphorically open the hood by asking different questions. What is this behavior communicating? What's the feeling or the experience underneath this surface action? What were the early conditions that might have shaped this adaptive response?
Shifting from judgment to curiosity.
Exactly. Curiosity and empathy. And that's where real healing can actually begin.
And it's not just about the individual or even just the family context, is it? Maté also widens the lens to look at society's role, pointing out how modern culture itself can actually amplify these ADHD struggles.
Oh, absolutely. This is a huge part of his argument. He suggests ADHD can often be seen as this fundamental mismatch between a child's or adult's natural temperament and brain wiring and a cultural environment that increasingly demands rigid focus, prolonged stillness, and uniformity.
Like our school systems.
Exactly. Think about our industrial-era schooling model. It often prioritizes conformity, sitting still for hours, rote learning. It really struggles to accommodate diverse learning styles and energy levels.
And then add in technology.
Right. Then there's the constant, relentless overstimulation from digital media everywhere, which arguably trains our brains for rapid-fire, novelty-seeking, not sustained attention. And we can't ignore the huge economic pressures on parents today, which can severely limit their time, energy, and capacity for that vital attunement their kids need.
So the culture itself creates stress.
That's his point. Maté poses this really provocative question. Is ADHD abnormal, or is it a mirror reflecting how abnormal our culture has become?
Wow.
He suggests that ADHD is a normal response to an abnormal culture, implying the problem isn't solely inherent in the individual, but maybe also in the unrealistic, sometimes harmful expectations society places on them. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and then blaming the peg for not fitting.
That's such a powerful thought that maybe society itself is creating, or at least worsening these challenges, rather than supporting natural human diversity. It makes me think of another analogy. Imagine if a clothing store only sold size medium, and society declared everyone must wear medium. Well, then people who are naturally small or large would suddenly be labeled abnormal or defective.
Right, exactly.
But the problem isn't really with their bodies. It's with the super limited, rigid definition of what's normal. Does that kind of resonate with Maté's view on ADHD and culture?
That's a fantastic parallel. It captures Maté's point precisely. Our culture, in so many ways, expects this singular mode of attention, a particular pace, a specific way of learning and behaving, kind of a societal medium size for the brain, as you put it. And those whose brains are wired differently, who might thrive in less rigid, more creative, or maybe more dynamic environments, they end up being pathologized. ADHD, in this context, is like wearing a size that just doesn't fit the cultural mandate. And it's often that demand for the single size, rather than an inherent flaw in the person, that creates so much distress and dysfunction. He's really asking us to question if our definitions of normal are just too narrow and maybe actively harming people who fall outside them.
Okay, this can feel like a lot to absorb, especially if you or someone you know has lived with these labels for a long time. But the flip side is that Maté ultimately offers such a hopeful, really humanizing vision for healing. So how do we take all this deep understanding and actually apply it? How do we move forward, foster genuine healing and growth?
Yeah, it's a lot, but the application is where the hope lies, right? Knowledge is most valuable when we can actually use it. And Maté provides a really clear framework. He identifies 4 crucial pillars for a healing journey, which shift the focus from punishment and blame towards deep compassion and support.
Okay, what are they?
The first, and maybe the most important, is compassion. This is truly the core medicine, he suggests. It means understanding suffering your own or someone else's without judgment, offering care unconditionally. It's the force that can transform shame into acceptance.
So for parents, that might look like?
For parents, it shifts the question from, say, why can't you just sit still, to something more like, what's making it difficult for you right now? What do you need?
And for adults with ADHD.
For adults living with it, it's about cultivating radical self-compassion, reframing those struggles not as moral flaws, but as symptoms of a sensitive nervous system shaped by life experiences, understanding the why behind the struggle.
So it's like that flower analogy you mentioned earlier. If a flower isn't blooming, you don't yell at it for being lazy.
Exactly.
You ask what it needs. Does it need more sunlight, more water, better soil? So compassion here is like the sunlight and water for the ADHD brain.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's about creating the right conditions for growth rather than just demanding an outcome without providing the necessary nourishment. That leads right into the second pillar, connection.
Back to relationships.
Always back to relationships. Maté stresses that secure attachment and consistent community connection are absolutely foundational for building resilience and helping regulate our nervous systems. Relationships truly are medicine. They anchor attention, they soothe dysregulation, they provide that essential sense of belonging.
So healing doesn't happen alone.
Rarely, if ever, he argues. It happens within relationships built on safety, trust, and ideally unconditional acceptance. For example, a parent who actively joins their child's imaginative world, even if it seems chaotic or unfocused to them, sends this profound message, I delight in you just as you are. That directly counteracts the deep-seated shame that so often accompanies ADHD. This kind of connection helps build that internal capacity for emotional regulation that might have been underdeveloped earlier.
Okay, compassion, connection. And the third pillar is something we often dismiss as just fun, maybe even frivolous, but Maté sees it as absolutely vital. Play.
Yes. Play is anything but trivial in his view. He sees it as a biological necessity, actually, and a
Mm.
profound tool for healing the nervous system.
How does play heal?
Well, genuine play stimulates brain regions crucial for attention and emotional regulation, but it does so in a stress-free context. It naturally lowers stress hormones like cortisol and strengthens pathways for joy, curiosity, and engagement.
For kids and adults?
Absolutely. For children, play is how they learn to regulate themselves, solve problems, connect with others. For adults, reclaiming play, finding activities done purely for joy and intrinsic motivation, can rekindle that sense of curiosity and combat the pervasive feeling of endless work and obligation that often dogs people with ADHD.
Like the example of the kid resisting worksheets but loving a card game.
Precisely. That child who vehemently resists math worksheets might happily, and with intense focus, calculate scores and strategize during an engaging card game. Play bypasses resistance because it wraps learning and self-regulation in inherent joy. It's a natural way to strengthen those prefrontal cortex connections without it feeling like a chore.
Okay, that makes sense. Compassion, connection, play. And finally, the fourth pillar, self-acceptance. This feels like it brings everything together.
It truly is the deepest level of healing, Maté suggests. Self-acceptance is that profound ability to say, maybe finally, I am not broken. I am enough exactly as I am,
That's huge.
isn't it? It means embracing ADHD as a part of one's unique story, maybe a different lens on the world, rather than letting it become this all-encompassing, limiting identity defined by deficits. This radical acceptance, really shedding the heavy weight of shame and self-judgment, is what opens the door to genuine growth, free from that constant, exhausting cycle of self-punishment.
So the core message for healing isn't fixing someone.
Not at all. Mate's core message is much more about restoring the conditions that allow for authentic growth, resilience, and wholeness. It's about creating the right environment internally and externally.
Wow. This deep dive has really shifted how we might understand ADHD, hasn't it?
Right.
Moving it from seeing it as just this isolated defect to understanding it as a complex, often ingenious adaptation, rooted in early experiences, amplified by our modern culture, and ultimately healed through this incredibly compassionate and holistic approach. Compassion, connection, play, and finally self-acceptance. It feels like a much more humanizing journey, offering real hope where there's often just been shame and struggle.
It really is a profoundly humanizing perspective. And, while medication can certainly be a helpful tool for many people in managing symptoms, Maté acknowledges that...
Right, it's not either.
Exactly. He reiterates that it's typically not a cure in itself. It really needs to be integrated into a broader, more holistic approach that fundamentally addresses those underlying emotional and relational factors we've been talking about.
And the potential for change is always there.
That's perhaps the most empowering message. Thanks to the brain's incredible neuroplasticity, its ability to change and adapt throughout life, healing and growth are genuinely possible at any age. It's never too late.
That's important to hear.
It is. And Maté leaves us with this really powerful paradox, I think. He suggests ADHD both wounds and reveals. It wounds when it's misunderstood, when it's mislabeled, when it's met with judgment or shame. But it also reveals a profound truth about our shared humanity, that we are all deeply shaped by love, connection, attunement, or by their absence. So the work of healing ADHD in this view isn't just about helping individuals manage symptoms.
It's bigger than that.
It's potentially about collectively building a world, a culture where every single child and every adult feels consistently safe, truly seen, and unconditionally loved for who they are. That's the deeper call.